When you hear someone being murdered, most people would physically cringe and mourn at the information. Some may even ask why or where. But what if they told you that they were supposed to die for the greater good? So today's matchup is a little on the edgy side. We have Light Yagami from a very famous manga called Death Note and Obito Uchiha from another very famous manga called Naruto Shippuden. Light Yagami being the main protagonist of Death Note and Obito Uchiha being a main protagonist of Naruto. These are two of manga's most morally conflicted anti-heroes of manga culture, and maybe anti-hero would be sugarcoating that just a little bit, because I should be replacing those words with genocidal maniac obsessed with the idea of a perfect world. As per the list, I will be covering Light first, and I'll give you his basis, then I'll cover Obito next, covering his basis, then compare and contrast. Let's get straight into it. Light Yagami was born in Japan on February 28, 1986, and by the time he was 18, he'd be a very intelligent student during his schooling days, but would come across a book created by a mystic demon named Ryuk. Soon, he would begin to understand that this book would be able to kill off anyone being their name was written in this book. Light would go on a murder spree as Kira. I'm interjecting here because while I was editing the video, I realized that I made a mathematical miscalculation. As you can see in this picture here, it says that 884,000 unnamed criminals were murdered, died of heart attacks after their names were written by Takada. That was just Takada, not Light as well, and it's really hard to pinpoint how many kills Light did as well as 126. So I do say 1.8 million, and I don't really have any evidence to tell you guys, oh yeah, it just in my script I probably was adding all the numbers that I did and then forgot to put timestamps of how many I saw from each number. So take 1.8 million with a grain of salt. And one last thing I would like to add is that the channel The Film Theorist, which is the Matt Pat's film or manga series, he has a video going way more in depth on how much the Death Note actually killed people in the hands of Light, Mikata, and Misa. And if you would like to watch that, it does go in depth scientifically on how many people would have been dead each day per person writing in the Death Note. But he does use a lot of anime knowledge and a lot of anime scenes, and if you're not really into using anime canon material, then that's totally fine. I understand that manga should be more important in these kind of videos because it's always going to be from what the author had wrote himself. But his numbers from his video stay about 600,000 per year, where mine are 1.8 mil. And if you were to calculate his calculations from 600,000 per year per 5 years he was alive using the Death Note, you would get a number of around 3 million estimated murders by the time he dies. He doubles my numbers, so like I said, just take both of our numbers with a grain of salt. We don't really know. It's kind of hard. I feel like the author definitely didn't want people to know how many would die. So yeah, take everything with a grain of salt for this bit. Light would go on a murder spree as Kira, killing corrupt people and political figures for 5 years, killing almost 1.8 million people, dying in 2010. His will for killing people was fed by an undertaking a moral high ground on corrupt political figures and or criminals, telling Ryuk that fear will control them. Obviously now, it is kind of frowned upon to commit mass genocide on people regardless of the law, but there's a definite mass majority of people that agreed with him, and so much that he spiraled Tokyo into mass panic for a little while. It is safe to assume that Light felt like a god in most of these moments, and that's why he kept going. Powers like a Death Note are very fickle, and it's understood that eventually Light becomes a villain because he seems to lose sight of his goal, and he's just killing to keep the idea of Kira fresh in the corrupt and evil. We can also assume that there was no bias involved because most deaths were from the prisons or political systems. Light also manipulated a few people into his clutches to keep his identity a secret, making those people feel really close to him as well, then taking advantage of those people to set his goal closer. Now, Obito is a little different, and I'm going to explain just how that is. Obito Uchiha graduated the academy sometime during the Third Great Ninja War and before Minato Namikaze became the 4th Hokage. He would join Team 7 with Rin Nohara, Kakashi Hatake, and himself with Minato as the leader. As little time went on, a very young Kakashi would become a Jonin right before going on a mission in the midst of the war, being the most deadly. Team 7 would go on a mission to destroy a bridge to help keep enemy lands at bay. During said mission, Obito and Kakashi would get sidelined and Obito would become crushed by a boulder, seemingly killing him. He'd later wake up in the clutches of Madara Uchiha, a man who would manipulate him into hating the shinobi world, and he would set up Rin's murder in front of Obito. Causing him serious trauma would make him see Madara's perspective clearly. Years later, Obito would attack Konoha with the Nine Tails and force Minato to sacrifice himself and Kushina as well. Obito would then stay in the shadows as Madara Uchiha, leading the Akatsuki into completing the project Tsuki no Mi. Obito, after meeting Sasuke Uchiha and capturing Seven-Tailed Beast, declared war on the shinobi world, teaming up with Kabuto after becoming a Snake Sage. Obito at the end would become the Ten Tails Jinchuriki and almost defeat the shinobi force. Obito in his early teen years was definitely a lost person, and that really set in stone, allowing Madara to manipulate Obito into being so pessimistic on the shinobi world. Obito really saw the world as nothing but pain and anguish after Rin's death. Obito manipulated a lot of people, the entire roster of the Akatsuki, Sasuke Uchiha, the 3rd Hokage, and Yagura, whom was a perfect Jinchuriki. For context, a perfect Jinchuriki can't even be put under Genjutsu. But Rin's death didn't entirely influence Obito's motivation on freezing over the world, and that's where this gets interesting. Because most of the general fanbase kind of call Obito an extreme simp for Rin, and that's just simply not true. During the fight with Kakashi, he even explains to him that it wasn't Rin's death that fully made him realize. It was the system that killed Rin that drove him over the edge. He saw that shinobi were just weapons at the end of the day, and he had to stop it. Now we have two antagonists that are very similar in their ways of forcing ideas upon the world. Light forces people to die in the name of ridding corruption of the world, and Obito starts wars and almost destroys the world to get people to live in his peaceful world he wanted created. So, who's more evil? Well, if we were to compare the amount of death each character had done, Light wins that award pretty hands down. Light destroyed his numbers, murdering people in 3 years, compared to Obito's maybe few 100,000 from the 3rd and 4th Great Ninja War. It's not that simple though. One would say Light's reasoning is very selfless in that he's murdering to rid the world of corruption in the political system and the judicial. But as we know, he diverges from that path and gets lost in the ego he created for himself. Obito murders, but only to force his ideals upon the world. Keep in mind his ideals. Forcing a mindset or moral compass is something that an Adolf Hitler character type could be capable of doing, and I think some would agree. Granted, I wouldn't compare those two closely, but those are some comparisons. So we have to turn to the general public on this one. Light Yagami was feared from the entire world. Everyone knew who he was and what he was set on doing, and that caused mass fear-mongering and hysteria among the population of Earth. As for Obito, most of the general public didn't even know who Obito was or was alive, and only the highest of military personnel was under the impression that Nagato was the leader of the Akatsuki in the first place. So even then, Obito was very unknown, especially if we talk about the fact that his own terrorist group was convinced he was Madara Uchiha. He didn't even need an identity to get his goal done, so I feel his ego wasn't fueling his ideals, just his mindset, only his will and feeling. It still feels like Light was selfless at first, but he became corrupt, and his ego fed that. Obito threw himself and his identity away to see his goals made. So in my mind, I think Light Yagami is more evil, but this is a very different outcome from Dio and Griffith because we have a lot of gray areas with Obito and Light. The obvious areas are that Light Yagami hungered for power and a fed ego. Obito felt the world needed rid of the pain he felt and was fogged by Madara's manipulation, so he forced his will upon the shinobi world. The gray areas are that obviously during Light's position on Kira, he wiped crime by some 70% 5 years into his Kira reign. Obito had no regard for public life because in his eyes, that public life would be in peace after he shined his will upon the world. comparing these two so closely is funny because they're actually quite similar. And to be honest, I think they're two characters that, even being from totally different shows, almost inherently are the same character in some aspects. Because Obito threw his identity away to create a new world doesn't necessarily mean he didn't do anything wrong. He destroyed villages and massacred people in the name of his own world. And if we look at Light the same way, Light even throws his own identity away to make it a more fleshed out archetype. But because Light wanted power and strength to feed his own ego, I'm giving this one to Light Yagami. Well guys, and that's going to conclude it for this video. I am going to continue this series. I'm having a lot of fun taking different media characters and comparing, contrasting their personalities. Let me know in the comments if you have any two characters you want me to compare. I kind of have an idea of who I'm going to do next already, but I will take into consideration these comments if they come. I hope everyone has a great day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends. I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.